The night the traffic camera footage aired on the 6 o'clock news, my mother called me 17 times. I did not answer. My father called 9 times. I did not answer him either. Then my younger sister texted me, "Mom is crying. Dad says you need to call before this ruins the family." I stared at the message for a long time. Ruins the family, not the man who hit me, not the lie that followed. Not the fact that my own parents made me apologize to the person who left me bleeding on the side of the road. No. According to them, I was the one ruining the family because the truth had finally become public. I was sitting in my small apartment with my left wrist still wrapped in a brace, watching myself on television. Not an interview, not a statement. Footage, clear, unforgiving footage from a city traffic camera. There I was, standing at the crosswalk with a grocery bag in one hand and my phone in the other. There was the black SUV turning too fast. There was the driver failing to stop. There was my body hitting the pavement. And there, seconds later, was the same driver stepping out of his car, looking around, and saying something. The microphone from a nearby storefront camera picked up clearly. She came out of nowhere. But I had not come out of nowhere. I had the walk signal. I had the right of way, and he knew it. His name was Brandon Hale. He was not a stranger to my family. He was my parents' favorite person from church, the son of their closest friends, the golden boy everyone protected. And 1 week after he hit me, my parents brought me to his house and made me say I was sorry for causing trouble. But that night, on live television, the entire city saw what really happened. And for the first time in my life, my parents could not tell me to be quiet. My name is Natalie Brooks. Before everything happened, I was the kind of daughter who tried very hard not to be a problem. That was my role in the family. My younger sister, Ava, was emotional. My father said she was sensitive. My mother said she needed extra patience. Brandon Hale, even though he was not related to us, was special, gifted, misunderstood, destined for great things. And me? I was responsible. Which really meant I was expected to absorb whatever other people did not want to carry. When I was 10, I learned not to cry too loudly because my mother would say, "Natalie, don't make everything heavier than it needs to be." When I was 13, I started helping Ava with homework because my parents said they were exhausted. When I was 16, I got a part-time job at a pharmacy and used my paycheck to buy my own clothes, my own school supplies, even groceries sometimes. My father called that independence. But independence is a funny word when it is given to a child too early. Sometimes it just means nobody is coming to help. The only place I felt seen was at the small community health clinic where I volunteered after school. I loved that place. I loved the nurses who remembered everyone's name. I loved the elderly patients who brought candy in their purses. I loved the feeling that care did not have to be dramatic to matter. By 23, I was working as a medical assistant and taking night classes because I wanted to become a nurse. It was not glamorous. Some nights I came home with sore feet, smelling like disinfectant, too tired to eat. But I was proud. I was building something, quietly, honestly, one shift at a time. Brandon Hale was everything I was not allowed to be. Careless, loud, protected. He was 26, drove a black SUV his parents helped pay for, and had already failed out of one business program, quit 2 jobs, and crashed 1 car. But somehow, every failure made people love him more. "He's under pressure," my mother would say. "He has such potential," my father would add. Brandon's parents, Mark and Linda Hale, were important at church. They donated money, hosted events, smiled at everyone, and always sat in the second row like they owned the sanctuary. My parents adored them, especially my mother. Being close to the Hales made her feel elevated, chosen, respected. So when Brandon made mistakes, my parents helped soften the story. When he yelled at a waitress, they said he was stressed. When he backed into someone's fence after drinking at a barbecue, they said young people make mistakes. When I once said Brandon made me uncomfortable, my father frowned and said, "You're too judgmental." Looking back, that should have been my warning. Because the people who excuse small harms are usually preparing to excuse larger ones. And I had no idea how large the next one would be. It happened on a Thursday evening in October. I remember the air smelled like rain. I had just finished a 10-hour shift at the clinic and stopped by the grocery store on my way home. I bought soup, bread, and a cheap bouquet of yellow flowers because my apartment looked sad and I wanted one small, pretty thing. The crosswalk outside Miller Street had a countdown signal. I waited. The white walking figure appeared. I stepped forward. Then I heard tires. Not a horn, not brakes, tires. A black SUV turned right too fast. For one split second, I saw the headlights. Then everything became impact. The grocery bag flew from my hand. The flowers scattered across the street. My body hit the pavement so hard the sound seemed to come from somewhere outside me. I remember trying to breathe. I remember pain in my wrist, pain in my ribs, pain everywhere. Then I heard a car door open. A man's voice said, "Oh my God." I opened my eyes. Brandon Hale was standing over me. Not kneeling, not helping. Standing. His face was pale, but his eyes were not on me. They were scanning the street. Looking for witnesses. A woman ran over from the bus stop. "She had the walk sign!" she shouted. Brandon immediately said, "She stepped out too fast." I tried to speak, but my mouth would not work. The woman said, "No, she didn't. I saw it." Brandon crouched then, but only because people were watching. "Natalie?" he said, pretending shock. "Is that you?" That was when I realized he knew exactly who I was. The ambulance came. The police came. Someone covered me with a jacket. At the hospital, I learned my wrist was fractured, my ribs were bruised, my left knee was badly scraped, and I had a mild concussion. I was lucky. That was what everyone kept saying. Lucky. I did not feel lucky. I felt terrified. My parents arrived 2 hours later. My mother came in first, crying. For one brief second, I thought she was crying for me. Then she said, "Natalie, what happened?" Brandon is beside himself. Brandon, not me. My father stood at the foot of the bed with a hard expression. His parents called us. I blinked. "Okay?" They said this could become very serious. I stared at him, confused. "It is serious. He hit me." My father lowered his voice. "Don't say it like that." Something cold moved through me. How should I say it? My mother sat beside the bed. "Honey, Brandon said you came out suddenly." I had the walk sign. My father looked uncomfortable. "He says he didn't see you." "That's not my fault." My mother touched my blanket. "Nobody is saying it's your fault." But that was exactly what they were saying. Just quietly, carefully, in the language of people who already chose a side and wanted me to pretend they had not. The next day, Brandon's mother called me, not to ask if I was okay, to explain how difficult this was for Brandon. "He hasn't slept," Linda said. I looked at my bruised arm. "I haven't either." She paused, then said, "Natalie, sweetheart, this could affect his future." I almost laughed. His future. The man who hit me still had a future everyone wanted to protect. Mine had just been interrupted, and somehow I was expected to be gracious about it. But that still was not the worst part. The worst part came 3 days later, when my parents told me we were going to the Hales house. I asked why. My mother said, "To clear the air." My father said, "To stop this from becoming ugly." I said, "He hit me." My father's eyes hardened. "And you're alive." That sentence changed something in me, not all at once, but enough. Because in that moment, I understood that survival was going to be used as proof that I had no right to be hurt. The Hales house looked perfect, as always. White columns, trimmed hedges, warm porch lights, a wreath on the door, even though it was not a holiday. Inside, Linda had set out tea and cookies like we were there for a book club meeting instead of an apology for a car accident. Brandon sat on the couch with his arm around his girlfriend, Madison. He looked tired, but not injured, not bruised, not scared in the way I had been scared when I saw his SUV coming toward me. His mother hugged my mother. His father shook my father's hand. Nobody hugged me. Nobody asked about my wrist. Nobody looked at the brace, except Madison, who glanced at it and then looked away like my injury was impolite. My father nudged me forward. I turned to him. "What are you doing?" He whispered. "Natalie, don't make this harder." Linda gave me a soft, practiced smile. "Brandon has been very upset." I looked at Brandon. He avoided my eyes. My mother said, "We all know this was an accident." I said nothing. My father's voice sharpened. "Natalie." Everyone looked at me. That was the moment I realized why I was there. Not to clear the air. Not to discuss what happened. They had brought me there to perform forgiveness. My mother whispered, "Just say what we talked about." I looked at her. We didn't talk about anything. Her face tightened. My father stepped closer. "Apologize for the misunderstanding." The room became very still. I looked at Brandon. He finally met my eyes. And then, unbelievably, he shrugged, like he was bored, like my pain had become inconvenient. My wrist throbbed inside the brace. My ribs hurt every time I breathed. And my parents were standing behind me, waiting for me to apologize to him. I do not know how long I stood there. Maybe 5 seconds. Maybe a lifetime. Then I said it. "I'm sorry." My voice barely came out. Linda exhaled dramatically, like peace had been restored. My mother smiled through tears. My father nodded once, satisfied. Brandon leaned back on the couch. "Thanks," he said. Not, "I'm sorry, too." Not, "Are you okay?" Just thanks, like I had returned something I stole. Something inside me broke so quietly nobody heard it. On the ride home, my mother said, "I'm proud of you." I looked out the window. For what? For choosing grace. Grace. That word made me sick. Because grace, in my family, always meant I had to bleed quietly so someone else could stay clean. After that night, everything got worse. Brandon's family began telling people I had stepped into traffic. At church, people gave me sympathetic smiles, but not the kind that meant they believed me. The kind that meant they pitied Brandon for being involved with someone so careless. Madison posted a vague message online. "Some people will do anything for attention, praying for truth and healing." I knew it was about me. Everyone knew. My hours at the clinic were cut temporarily because I could not use my wrist properly. Medical bills arrived. Insurance dragged. My parents told me not to pursue legal action. My father said, "You don't want to be known as the girl who tried to destroy Brandon Hale." I said. "He hit me." My mother snapped. "And you apologized." There it was. The trap. They had forced me to apologize, then used the apology as evidence that I was guilty. That was my lowest point. Sitting alone in my apartment, wrist aching, bills on the table, watching people protect the man who hurt me because admitting the truth would embarrass them. I almost gave up. Almost. Then, one afternoon, a woman from the bus stop called me. Her name was Diane. She said, "Natalie, I don't know if anyone told you this, but there's a city traffic camera at that intersection." I sat up slowly. "What?" "And a bakery across the street has outdoor audio on their security system." My heart started pounding. Diane lowered her voice. "I saw what happened, and I don't think Brandon's family knows there's footage." For the first time since the accident, I felt something other than pain. I felt hope. Hope is a strange thing. When you've been drowning long enough, even the smallest possibility feels dangerous. I wanted to believe Diane. I wanted to believe there was footage. I wanted to believe the truth still mattered. But I had already spent 2 weeks watching everyone choose Brandon over reality. So I was afraid to hope too much. The next morning, Diane met me at a coffee shop near City Hall. She was in her 60s, with silver hair and a denim jacket covered in pins from national parks she'd visited. The kind of woman who looked gentle until you realized she was impossible to intimidate. She slid into the booth across from me. "I saw everything." I nodded. "I know." "No," she said. "I mean everything." Then she told me exactly what happened. The walk signal. The speeding turn. Brandon looking down at his phone. The impact. The lie. Every detail matched my memory. Except one. The city camera recorded it. My heart started racing again. Are you sure? She nodded. I used to work for the transportation department. For the first time in weeks, I felt my chest loosen. Not completely, just enough to breathe. The footage wasn't publicly available, at least not immediately. But Diane helped me file a formal request through the proper channels. Then she helped me contact the bakery owner across the street. The owner, a woman named Rosa Martinez, remembered me instantly. "You're the girl who got hit." I smiled weakly. "That's me." Rosa disappeared into the back room. When she returned, she was holding a hard drive. I kept the footage. I stared at her. "You did?" She nodded. "I saw the police asking questions." My pulse quickened. "What does it show?" Rosa looked at me carefully. Then she said the words that changed everything. "It shows exactly what happened." I almost cried, not because I had won, because someone finally believed me. Someone besides Diane. Someone besides myself. The next several weeks became a battle. Insurance companies, attorneys, requests, paperwork, evidence reviews. Nothing moved quickly, and honestly, I was exhausted. There were nights I sat on my apartment floor, surrounded by medical bills, wondering if any of it was worth it. Then I would remember standing in the Hales' living room. Remember saying, "I'm sorry." Remember Brandon thanking me like I owed him something. And I kept going. My parents became increasingly angry. Not concerned, angry. My father called constantly. "You need to let this go." My mother said, "Why are you dragging everyone through this?" Dragging everyone through this, as if I had driven the SUV, as if I had created the lie, as if I had forced them to choose Brandon over me. Looking back, I should have realized something. The truth wasn't threatening Brandon anymore. It was threatening everyone who defended him, and that scared them far more. Then one afternoon, my attorney called. "Natalie?" His voice sounded different. "What happened?" "We have the city footage." I sat down immediately, and there was a pause. Then, "It's even worse than we thought." 3 days later, the footage became public. Not because of me, not because of a lawsuit, because a local news station obtained it through a public records request. And suddenly, the story that everyone had ignored became impossible to ignore. At 6 o'clock that evening, the footage aired. The entire city saw it, frame by frame. Slow motion, unedited. Brandon's SUV approached the intersection. The walk signal was clearly visible. Green. I stepped into the crosswalk legally. Brandon wasn't watching the road. He was looking down. His phone was in his hand. The footage zoomed in. The reporter paused the video. There was no ambiguity, no misunderstanding, no confusion. Then came the second twist. The bakery audio recording. The audio everyone thought would be useless. The reporter played it. The impact happened. People screamed. Then Brandon's voice became audible. Not perfectly, but clearly enough. She came out of nowhere. Then another voice. A witness. "You were looking at your phone." Then Brandon again. "We need to keep that quiet." The newsroom fell silent. The anchor looked directly into the camera. What viewers have just heard raises serious questions about the original statements given after the accident. Serious questions. That was the professional way of saying, he lied, and suddenly everything changed. Social media exploded. The church community erupted. People who had ignored me started sending messages. People who had doubted me suddenly remembered being unsure. Funny how certainty disappears when evidence arrives. Then came the real shock. The police reopened the investigation. Apparently, Brandon's original statement omitted several important details, including phone use, including witness testimony, including information that might have changed the entire case. By the next afternoon, Brandon's attorney released a statement. By evening, Brandon deleted every social media account he owned. By Friday morning, local news stations were running follow-up stories. And then my mother called 17 times. Because the footage hadn't only exposed Brandon, It exposed everyone who defended him, including her, including my father, including the church leaders who pressured people to stay quiet, including Brandon's parents. For years, they had built their reputations on being respected members of the community. Now everyone was asking the same question. Why were they so desperate to protect him? The answer became obvious, because they cared more about embarrassment than truth. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being forced to explain myself. They were. 3 days after the footage aired, my parents came to my apartment, together. That alone told me something was wrong. My father looked exhausted. My mother looked like she had been crying for days. I opened the door but didn't invite them inside immediately. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then my mother whispered, "We were wrong." I had imagined hearing those words for years. Strangely, they didn't feel satisfying, just late. Very late. I stepped aside. They entered. The apartment felt smaller with them inside it. My father sat down first. For once, he didn't try to take control of the conversation. My mother looked around the room, at the unpaid medical bills, at the brace, at the small apartment I could barely afford. Then she started crying again. Not dramatic tears, not performative tears, real ones. We thought we were helping. I almost laughed. Helping. The same excuse everyone uses when they hurt someone they don't want to understand. My father rubbed his forehead. I watched the footage. I nodded. So did everyone else. He swallowed hard. Natalie. He never even looked up. The realization seemed to physically hurt him, because until then, he had been able to tell himself there were two sides, two versions, two truths. The footage destroyed that fantasy. There had only ever been one truth. He just hadn't wanted it. Then my mother asked the question, "Can you forgive us?" The room became very quiet. I looked at both of them, really looked, and for the first time, I saw something different. Not authority, not certainty, regret. I thought carefully before answering. Maybe someday. My mother's face fell. But it was the truth. Forgiveness is not a light switch. It's a process, and trust takes even longer. The consequences came naturally after that. Brandon lost his position at the company where he worked. The civil case settled. Insurance eventually covered most of my expenses. Several church leaders publicly apologized, not because they suddenly became brave, because evidence left them no choice. As for Brandon, he never contacted me again. Not once. And honestly, that was probably the kindest thing he ever did. Because by then, I didn't need an apology. The truth had already spoken louder. A year later, I walked through the same intersection, the same crosswalk, the same traffic light, the same street where everything changed. The city had installed new safety signals, new cameras, new warning signs. Most people walking past had no idea what happened there. And that was okay, because the intersection wasn't important anymore. The lesson was, for most of my life, I believed being a good daughter meant keeping the peace, keeping people comfortable, swallowing hurt, accepting blame, making everything easier for everyone else. What happened taught me something different. Peace built on lies isn't peace. It's silence. And silence always protects the wrong person. My parents and I eventually rebuilt part of our relationship. Not all of it. Some cracks never completely disappear, but they learned something. And so did I. Love without accountability becomes permission. Family without truth becomes performance. And self-respect begins the moment you stop apologizing for things that were never your fault. That was the real victory. Not the footage. Not the settlement, not the public apology. The real victory was finally believing my own truth even when nobody else did. If this story meant something to you, let us know in the comments. Have you ever been blamed for something that wasn't your fault? Have you ever watched people protect the wrong person because admitting the truth was inconvenient? What would you have done if you were Natalie? Would you have forgiven your parents? Or would you have walked away forever? We'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't against strangers. They're against the people who should have stood beside us from the beginning. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Every week we share powerful stories about family betrayal, hidden truths, emotional justice, and the moments when life finally turns the tables. Because sometimes the truth takes a long time to arrive, but when it does, it changes everything. And the next story might be one you never forget.